and radio.
Well, folks, hello, good evening, and welcome. This is Samuel Trapp. You're listening to International Flavor and Damn Radio. You can phone in at 573-746-8020. I'm going to apologize, not too much, for what happened yesterday. Apparently, quite a bit of storming, and that left us in a terrible position, and it did not allow us to do our show from yesterday. So, all the news today, everywhere, is old Trumpster and his speech last night. I got to tell you, that was a very strong speech. I did watch all of it live, watched it from the very beginning, and in general, again, I'm a 75-80%er when it comes to Trump. But I do worry about him on an international level, as I've said repeatedly, and I will continue to outline for you because I think it was just wrong. Today, my plan, I have a something that I wanted to tell you about. Some of you may already know it. I've referred to it before here, but I don't know that I've gone deep enough into it that people should really want to know what's going on. I have some theories that are developing based on some of the things that JR has said for a while, that he thinks there's a some kind of a, I don't know what, a plan with Trump, a plan to work with Putin, with Xi Jinping, and I got to tell you, what he's doing is kind of going in that direction for the most part. But I'm not sure I believe it. He's not saying that. He's saying things that are a little bit opposite of that. But who cares what he says? Pay attention to what the boy does. And that's what I say. And so I'm very interested in what's going on. And there's some very cool, well, I shouldn't say cool, some very uh, things that need to be paid attention to going on internationally. So just in the last few days, now there's been a lot of people for a lot of time talking about deep state issues and the desire in Europe and everywhere else to divide Ukraine into three pieces. Okay, maybe even four. That Poland would take over up to Lvov. Romania would take over east over to almost all the way to Kiev, and Russia would come all the way up to the Dnieper River and cross and take over through Odessa, so that Odessa hooks up with Transnistria, former Moldovan Republic, so that they're all together, because the Russians will never agree to give up Odessa as a port for some kind of NATO fleet. You know, they and Turkey have worked pretty well together, not to completely keep out NATO in the West, but there's no reason for NATO in the West generally to be over there. And so they haven't had a lot of access to get in, and shipping is a little bit different. But warships, that's something completely the same, different. I don't know if or how many U.S. warships, cruisers, destroyers, aircraft carriers have gone through the Straits of Bosphorus, through Istanbul, one side of which is Europe and the other side of which is Asia. And it'd be interesting to find out, and I may actually go have a look at that and attempt to find out for real how much that is. Well, I've seen a lot of maps in the last few days that I wish I could show you. Saw one last night, and I saw one a couple days ago that were quite similar. And those maps show Russia taking over. If Russia went all the way to the Dnieper, what they would do. We're talking the Sumy region. We're talking Kharkov. We're talking Dnipropetrovsk. We're talking, instead of taking over 22, 23% of Ukraine, taking over 40, 45% if they got all the way up to Kiev. and because Kiev is quite near the Dnieper, if not on it. I don't remember the geography on the map, but I do know that the Dnieper curves up into that direction. But I always thought that Odessa would be fair play for the Russians because Odessa has historically been a Russian naval port, and go from there. Well, when Trump was talking last night, I couldn't help but think of these things and how they dovetail, how they go together, especially when he said, and I don't want to say shocked, I'm never shocked anymore by what Trump says, but this was a punch in the face, let's call it. Well, I will let you know that we're taking Panama Canal back. We're taking it back. Taking it back. Okay. Disagree with Carter all you want. The man's dead. He was not the greatest of presidents by any equation of how you judge a president. He just wasn't it. Huge gas lines, bad gas prices. I think that was the first Iran hostage deal, if I recall. And there were certainly issues in the Carter. I think he was probably considered the worst in our lifetime until the old Biden term of office here that just ended. And so the Republicans have, or no Republicans, the Democrats have that horror story to let them pick. Which one do you think is worse? Who's worse for you, uh, uh, Carter or Biden? I'm not sure who that is. Well, I got to thinking about this, and Trump was pretty bravely out there saying, "Well, we're taking Panama. Rubio, get over there and take that thing. We got companies that are buying the ports on either side. We're working on it. We're gonna run China out of there. We didn't sell that to China. Okay, that's story number one. Story number two. Well, those little midgets up there in Greenland got all this land and nothing to do with it. So I guess we're just going to take it because we need it for our security. Okay, think about those words. We need it for our security. So because we need something, arguably any country in the world needs something. China needs Taiwan to complete its one China policy. They need that. Russia needs a fleet in Cuba. Pick it. Any country you want that needs something now can just willy nilly jump into the other country next door. The thing that NATO has been crying about all of this time is not that they have been killing and murdering and down, what do you call it? Putting down Russian citizens in the Donbass. It's that what about our territorial integrity guaranteed to us by the UN Charter, guaranteed to us by everything? And what about all of these? Well, I want to play for you, and I wish it makes me wish you could speak Russian because before J.D. Vance, and I know I've mentioned this before J.D. Vance's extremely good speech in front of the uh, Munich Security Conference that occurred this year, the one before that, that was the best ever before J.D. Vance, was Vladimir Putin. And I've watched it a couple of times in the last month because it's like he's a prophet when he talks about these things. And what I've decided to do today, it's a 20-minute, 23-minute, something like that. I will play it because in order to read it off to you what the translation says in English, I have to play it. And somebody has a translation in there. And I also got to be able to stop it in case it goes too quickly. And I will have it a tiny bit in the background, but just a small amount of voice that I will read over it so you can hear what he's saying. And I didn't translate this myself. I'm just going to read it for you. And you'll hear it in the background, and I hope it isn't overbearing or take over my voice or anything like that. That it will be something that um, uh, that you will appreciate. And if you haven't seen this, if you haven't heard it, if you he's like a prophet. Now this was in 2007, right before he formed or assisted. No, they had already formed BRICS because he mentioned it either right before or right after or at the same time. They were talking about it and they had already made the decision. And he is basically at that time sticking his thumb in the eye of everyone. Joe Lieberman was sitting there glaring at him. Who's the vice president? Cheney was sitting there and glaring at him. There were all of the leaders of UN and NATO were there, and he tore them up just like Vance did. And he said, "You know, I'm glad you invited me here to speak." And then he went on, well, with Trump's speech yesterday, with Putin's speech in 2007, with everything that he has said since then, I don't want to say it all began in 2007, but in 2007, I believe, is when they gave up. when the Russians said, "Oh, hell with it. It's we're not getting what we think we should get here." And so we're going to create BRICS, and we're going to discuss this world order. And it's sudden. It's. I'm going to take the 20 minutes to read it to you. Sorry about that for so long, but I am looking through my history to make sure that it shows up. And I also want to make sure that I have the sound on appropriately and that it's not too loud because I am going to read over the top of it. So I want to give a little test whirl to make sure that it can be heard and see how it goes. Let's try that and see. Yep, it's all there. You'll be able to hear it, and I just want you to hear it just a little bit in the background. And basically, we will start right here where it begins at the very beginning of the speech. Here it says it is. Oh, it's nearly 30 minutes long. But it's well worth it. And if you haven't heard the second most powerful man in the world, arguably Xi Jinping and Modi would be up in that group too, you should know what he said. And so I'm going to deliver it to you. And here we begin. Thank you very much, dear Madam Federal Chancellor, Mr. Telchik, ladies and gentlemen. I'm truly grateful to be invited to such a representative conference that has assembled politicians, military officials, entrepreneurs, and experts from more than 40 nations. This conference's structure allows me to avoid excess politeness and to the need to speak in roundabout, pleasant, but empty diplomatic terms. This conference format allows me to say what I really think about international security problems. And if my comments seem unduly polemical, pointed, or inexact to our colleagues, then I would ask you not to get angry with me. After all, this is only a conference, and I hope that after the first 2 or 3 minutes of my speech, Mr. Telchik will not turn off on the red light over there to stop people. Little joke. Therefore, it is well known that international security compromises much more than issues relating to military spending. It involves the stability of the global economy, overcoming poverty, economic security, and developing a dialogue between civilizations. This universal, indivisible character of security is expressed as the basic principle that security for one is security for all. As Franklin Roosevelt said during the Second World War after it was breaking out, when peace has been broken anywhere, the peace of all countries everywhere is in danger. These words remain typical today. Incidentally, the theme of our conference, which is written here, Global Crisis, Global Responsibility, exemplifies this. Only 2 decades ago, the world was ideologically and economically divided. And it was the huge strategic potential of 2 superpowers that ensured global security. The global standoff pushed the sharpest economic and social problems to the margins of the international community and the world agenda. And just like any war, the Cold War left us with live ammunition, figuratively speaking. I am referring to ideological stereotypes, double standards, and other typical aspects of Cold War bloc thinking. The unipolar world that has been proposed after the Cold War did not take place either. The history of humanity certainly has gone through unipolar periods and seen aspirations to world supremacy. And what hasn't happened in world history? However, what is a unipolar world? However one might embellish the term, at the end of the day, it refers to one type situation, namely one center of authority, one center of force, one center of decision-making. It's a world in which there is one master, one sovereign, and at the end of the day, this is pernicious, not only for all within the system, but also for the sovereign itself, because it destroys itself from within. And this certainly has nothing in common with democracy. Because as you know, democracy is the power of the majority in light of the interests and opinions of the minority. Incidentally, Russia, we are constantly being taught about democracy. But for some reason, those who teach us don't want to learn the lessons themselves. I consider the unipolar world model is not only unacceptable, but is also impossible in today's world. And this is not only because if there was individual leadership in today's and precisely today's world, then the military, political, and economic resources would not be enough. What is even more important is that the model itself is flawed because at its basis, there is and can be no moral foundation for modern civilization. Along with this, what is happening in today's world, and we're just getting started discussing this, is a tentative to introduce precisely this concept into international affairs, the concept of a unipolar world. The concept of and with what results? Unilateral and frequently illegitimate actions have not resolved any problems. Moreover, they have caused new human tragedy and created new centers of tension. Judge for yourselves. Wars as well as local and regional conflicts have not diminished under unipolar world. Mr. Telshik mentioned this very gently previously. And no less people perish in these conflicts. Even more are dying now than before. Significantly more. Significantly more. Today we are witnessing an almost uncontained hyper use of force, military force, in international relations, force that is plunging the world into an abyss of permanent conflict. And as a result, we do not have the strength to find a comprehensive solution to any one of these conflicts. Finding a political settlement also is impossible. We are seeing greater and greater disdain for the basic principles of international law. And independent legal norms are, as a matter of fact, coming increasingly closer to one state's legal system. That state is, of course, first and foremost, the United States. It has overstepped its national borders in every way. This is visible in the economic, political, cultural, and educational policies it imposes on other nations. Who likes this? Who is happy about this? You should see how young he is in this picture, folks. In international relations, we are increasingly seeing the desire to resolve a given question according to so-called issues of political expediency, based on the current political climate. And of course, this is extremely dangerous. It results in the fact that no one feels safe. I want to emphasize this. No one feels safe, because no one can feel that international law is like a stone wall that will protect them. Of course, such a policy stimulates another arms race. The force's dominance inevitably encourages a number of countries to acquire weapons of mass destruction. Moreover, significantly new threats, though they were well known before, have appeared, and today threats such as terrorism have taken on global character. I am convinced that we have reached the decisive moment in time when we must seriously think about the architecture of the global security. And we must proceed by searching for a reasonable balance between the interests of all participants in international dialogue, especially since the international landscape is so varied and changes so quickly. Changes in light of the dynamic development in a whole number of countries and regions. Madam Federal Chancellor already mentioned this. The combined GDP measured in purchasing power parity of countries such as India and China is already greater than that of the United States. And a similar calculation with GDP of the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, surpassed the cumulative GDP of the European Union. And according to experts, this gap will only increase in the future. And by the way, I'd point out that right now they're at 56%. And the EU is like 28. It's only going down. The percent of GDP. He's like a prophet right here. This is exactly right. Okay, and yet who's in charge still? Donald J. Trump, Joseph Robinette Biden. Okay, there is no reason to doubt that the economic potential of the new centers of global economic growth will inevitably be converted into political influence and will strengthen multipolarity. In connection with this, the role of multilateral diplomacy is increasing. The need for principles such as openness, transparency, and predictability in politics is uncontested. The use of force should be a really exceptional measure, comparable to using the death penalty in judicial systems of certain states. However, today we are witnessing the opposite tendency, namely a situation in which countries that forbid the death penalty, even for murder and other dangerous criminal activities, are airily participating in military operations that are difficult to consider legitimate. And as a matter of fact, these conflicts are killing people, hundreds of thousands of civilians. But at the same time, the question arises of whether we should be indifferent and aloof to various internal conflicts inside countries, to authoritarian regimes, to tyrants, and to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. As a matter of fact, this was also at the center of the question that our dear colleague Mr. Lieberman asked the federal chancellor. If I correctly understood your question, Mr. Lieberman. Can we be indifferent observers in view of what is happening? I will try to answer your question as well. Of course not. But we do have the means. Do we have the means to counter these threats? Certainly we do. It is sufficient to look at recent history. Did not our country have a peaceful transition to democracy? He's talking about Russia. Indeed, we witnessed a peaceful transformation of the Soviet regime, a peaceful transformation. And what a regime, with a number of weapons, including nuclear weapons. Why should we start bombing and shooting now at every available opportunity? It is the Is it the case when, without the threat of mutual destruction, we do not have enough political culture, respect for democratic values and the law? I am convinced that the only mechanism that can make decisions about using military force as a last resort is the Charter of the United Nations. And in connection with this, either I did not understand what our colleague, the Italian Minister of Defense, just said, or what he said was incorrect. In any case, I understood that the use of force can only be legitimate if it's used when a decision is taken by NATO, the EU, or the UN. If he really thinks that, then we have different points of view. Or I didn't hear him correctly. The use of force can only be considered legitimate if the decision is sanctioned by the UN. And we do not need to substitute NATO or the EU for the UN. When the UN will truly unite the forces of the international community and can really react to events in various countries, when we leave behind this disdain for international law, then the situation will be able to change. Otherwise, the situation will simply result in a dead end, and the number of serious mistakes will be multiplied. I hope you understand what he was saying right there, and if you don't, I'm going to put it out to you. So, the chancellor of the at the conference said that the only people that could create a or justify the need for arms or for military involvement somewhere was the UN, but he added in NATO and the European Union, leaving Russia completely out of it. And Putin says, I heard you wrong if you said that you can add these two other elements in. The UN, yes. Now remember, this is the same time, right around this, and India's been fighting about this forever when India was going, when do we get a seat at the table? You know, who in the hell are we? What are we? What are we? Nobody? We chopped liver? We have more people on the planet than anyone else. At that time, they were number two. Now they're number one. But we don't get a seat at the table. All of the decisions are made by the same old people in the West. And Putin is saying, no. He's saying, you know, the Soviet Union is gone and we thought we would all come together and be friends, but that didn't happen. Instead, we have this unipolar world order where the U.S. and these small handful of people get to force their will upon the rest of the world because they control all the seats of power. And is that the way it's supposed to go? And he's pounding them right in the face. And the looks on these are just as classic as they are when J.D. Vance was talking. Along with this, it is necessary that international law have universal character, both in concept and application of norms. And one must not forget that democratic political action necessarily go together during the decision-making process. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the potential danger of destabilization of international relations is connected with obvious stagnation in disarmament. Russia supports the renewal of dialogue on this question. It is important to conserve the international legal framework relating to weapons destruction and therefore ensure continuity in the process of reducing nuclear weapons. Together, we agreed with the United States of America. We agreed to reduce our nuclear strategic missile capabilities up to the 17 to 2,000 nuclear warheads by December 31, 2012. Russia intends to strictly fulfill its obligation. We hope that our partners will also act in a transparent way and will refrain from laying aside a couple of hundred superfluous weapon warheads for a rainy day. That's a joke, too. He's pointing at the defense minister. If today the new American defense minister declares that the U.S. will not hide these superfluous weapons in warehouses or under a pillow or under a blanket, then I suggest that we all greet this declaration standing. It would be a very important declaration. Boy, they don't like that at all. There wasn't a laugh in the place. Russia strictly adheres to, intends to further adhere to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, as well as the multilateral supervision regime for missile technologies. Principles incorporated in these documents are universal. In connection with this, I would like to recall that in the 1980s, the USSR and the United States signed an agreement on destroying a whole range of small and medium-range missiles. But these documents do not have universal character. Today, many other countries have these missiles, including the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, India, Iran, Pakistan, and Israel. Many countries are working on these systems and plan to incorporate them as part of their weapons. And only the United States and Russia bear the responsibility to not create such weapons. It is obvious that in these conditions, we must think about ensuring our own security. At the same time, it is impossible to sanction the appearance of new destabilizing high-tech weapons. Needless to say, it refers to measures to prevent a new area of confrontation, especially in outer space. You heard Trump talk about this last night, right? Star Wars is no longer a fantasy, it is reality. In the middle of the 80s, our American partners were able to intercept their own satellites. In Russia's opinion, the militarization of outer space can have unpredictable consequences for the international community and provoke nothing less than the beginning of a nuclear era. And we have come forward more than once with initiatives designed to prevent the use of weapons in outer space. Quite true, by the way. Today I will tell you that we have prepared a project for an agreement on the prevention of deploying weapons in outer space. Nobody's even paid attention to it. In the near future, it will be sent to our partners as an official proposal. Let's work on this together. Plans to expand certain elements of the anti-missile defense system to Europe cannot help but disturb us. Who needs the next step of what would be, in this case, an inevitable arms race? I deeply doubt that Europeans themselves do. Missile weapons with a range of 5,000 to 8,000 kilometers that really pose a threat to Europe do not exist in any of the so-called problem countries. And in the near future and prospective, this will not happen and isn't even foreseeable. And any hypothetical launch, for example, a North Korean rocket to America through Western Europe, obviously contradicts the laws of ballistics. As we say in Russian, it would be like using the right hand to reach the left ear. And here in Germany, I cannot help but mention the pitiable condition of the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe. The adapted Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe was signed in 1999, took into account the new geopolitical reality, namely the elimination of the Warsaw Bloc. 7 years have passed, and only 4 states have ratified this document, including the Russian Federation. NATO countries openly declared that they will not ratify this treaty, including the provisions on flank restrictions, on deploying a certain number of armed forces in the flank, that's Ukraine and everywhere else, until Russia removes its military bases from Georgia and Moldova. Our army is leaving Georgia, even according to an accelerated schedule. We resolved the problems we had with our Georgian colleagues, as everyone knows. There are still 1,500 servicemen in Moldova that are carrying out peacekeeping operations and protecting warehouses with ammunition left over from the Soviet time. We constantly talk about this issue, and the leader knows our position. We are ready to further work in this direction. But what is happening at the same time? Simultaneously, the so-called flexible frontline American bases appear in Bulgaria and Romania with up to 5,000 men in each one. It turns out that NATO has put its frontline forces on our borders. And we continue to strictly fulfill the treaty obligations and do not react to these at all. I think it's obvious that NATO expansion does not have any relation with the modernization of the alliance or with ensuring security in Europe. On the contrary, it represents a serious provocation that reduces the level of mutual trust. And we have the right to ask, against whom is this expansion intended? And what happened to the assurances of our Western partners made after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact? Where are those declarations today? No one even remembers them, but I will allow myself to remind you. I would like to quote the speech of NATO General Secretary Mr. Warner in Brussels on the 17th of May, 1990. He said then, "The fact that we are ready not to place a NATO army outside of German territory gives the Soviet Union a firm security guarantee. Where are these guarantees? The stones and concrete blocks of the Berlin Wall have long been distributed as souvenirs, but we should not forget that the fall of the Berlin Wall was possible thanks to historic choice, one that was also made by our people, the people of Russia, a choice in favor of democracy, freedom, openness, and sincere partnership with all the members of the big European family. And now they are trying to impose new dividing lines and walls upon us. These walls may be virtual, but they are nevertheless dividing, ones that cut through our continent. And it is possible that we will once again require many years and decades, as well as several generations of politicians to disassemble and dismantle these new walls. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are unequivocally in favor of strengthening the regime of non-proliferation. The present international legal principle allows us to develop technology to manufacture nuclear fuel for peaceful purposes. And many countries, with all good reason, want to create their own nuclear energy structures as a basis for their energy independence. But we also understand that these technologies can quickly be transformed into nuclear weapons. This creates a serious international tension. The situation surrounding the Iranian nuclear program acts as a clear example. And if the international community does not find a reasonable solution for resolving this conflict, the world will continue to suffer similar destabilizing crises, because there are more threshold countries than just Iran. We all know this. We are going to constantly fight against the threat of a proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Last year, Russia put forward the initiative to establish international centers for the enrichment of uranium. We are open to the possibility that such centers not only be created in Russia, but in other countries where there is a legitimate basis for using civil nuclear energy. Countries that want to develop their nuclear energy could guarantee that they will reserve fuel through a direct participation in these centers. And the centers would, of course, operate under strict IAEA supervision. The latest initiative put forward by President Bush are in conformity with Russia's proposals. I consider that Russia and the USA are objectively and equally interested in strengthening the regime of non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and their deployment. It is precisely our countries which lead in nuclear and missile capabilities that must act as leaders in developing new, strict non-proliferation measures. Russia is ready for such work. We are engaged in consultation with our American friends. In general, we should talk about establishing a whole system of political incentive and economic stimuli whereby it would not be in a state interests to establish their own capabilities in the nuclear fuel cycle, but they would still have the opportunity to develop nuclear energy and strengthen their energy capabilities. In connection with this, I shall talk about international energy cooperation in more detail. Madam Chancellor also spoke about this briefly. She mentioned and touched on this theme. In energy sector, Russia intends to create uniform market principles and transparent conditions for all. It is obvious that energy prices must be determined by the market instead of being subject of political speculation, economic pressure, or blackmail. We are open to cooperation. Foreign companies participate in all of our major energy projects. And pay attention to this one. This is important. Think about this. This when I heard this, I was like, you know what? He's absolutely right. And what a kick in the teeth to the West this was. According to different estimates, up to 26% of the oil extraction in Russia, and please think about this figure, up to 26% of oil extraction in Russia is done by foreign investors. Try again to find one similar example where Russian businesses participate extensively in key economic sectors of Western countries. Such examples do not exist. There are none. I would also recall the parity of foreign investment in Russia and those Russia makes abroad. The parity is about 15-1. And here you have the example of openness and the stability of the Russian economy. By the way, he's absolutely right here. And there's people glaring back at him like you wouldn't believe. They don't like to hear the truth. Economic security is the sector in which all must adhere to uniform principles. We are ready to compete fairly. For that reason, more and more opportunities are appearing in the Russian economy. Experts and our Western partners are evaluating these opportunities. As such, Russia sovereign credit rating improved, and Russia passed from the fourth to the third group of credit security. And today in Munich, I would like to use this occasion to thank our German colleagues for their help in that decision. Furthermore, as you know, the process of Russia joining the World Trade Organization has reached its final stages. I would point out that during the long, difficult talks, we heard words about freedom of speech, free trade, and equal possibilities more than once. But for some reason, exclusively in reference to the Russian market. And there is still one more important theme that directly affects global security. Today, many talk about the struggle against poverty. What is actually happening in this sphere? On the one hand, financial resources are allocated for programs to help the world's poorest countries, and at times, substantial financial resources. But to be honest, and many here know this too, linked with the development of the donor countries' companies. So meaning basically, we give you money, but you don't develop. We develop. We take over your entire place. He's kicking the U.S. right in the teeth here, and all of Europe, because they're all doing the same thing. On the other hand, developed countries simultaneously keep their agriculture subsidies and limit some countries' access to high-tech products. And let's say things as they are. On one hand, distributes charitable help, and the other hand, not only preserves economic backwardness in such countries, but reaps the profits thereof. The increasing social tension in depressed regions inevitably results in the growth of radicalism, extremism, and feeds terrorism and local conflict. And if all this happens in, shall we say, a region such as the Middle East, where there is increasingly the sense that the world at large is unfair, then there is the risk of global destabilization. It is obvious that the world's leading countries should see this threat, and they should therefore build a more democratic, fair system of global economic relations, a system that would give everyone the chance and the possibility to develop. Dear ladies and gentlemen, speaking at the Conference on Security Policy, it is impossible not to mention the activities of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. As is well known, the organization was created to examine all, and I emphasize all aspects of security, military, political, economic, humanitarian, and especially the relations between these spheres. What do we see happening today? We see that this balance is clearly destroyed. People are trying to transform the OSCE into a vulgar instrument designed to promote foreign policy interests of one group of countries. And this task is being accomplished by the OSCE's bureaucratic apparatus, which has found its way into the state, which doesn't have anything to do with the state founders in any way. Decision-making procedures, the involvement of so-called non-governmental organizations. Here he's talking about U.S. Agency for International Development and similar, National Endowment for Democracy specifically. And all these people have their heads down looking at the table. And they are all tailored to this task. These organizations are independent, but they are purposefully financed and therefore under control of the states from where they're from. According to the founding documents, in the humanitarian sphere, the OSCE is about to assist countries in seeing international human rights at their request. So what he's saying is USAID can say there's international human rights violations, and this government agency U.S. Agency for International Development is not a government agency. It's just funded by the government. But they have the power of the government because they can get the Security Council to act on their behalf and tell it what to do. So it's been going on for a long time, folks. This is an important task, and we support it. But this does not mean interfering in the internal affairs of other countries, and especially not imposing a regime that determines how these states should live and develop. It is obvious that such interference does not promote the development of democratic states at all. On the contrary, it makes them dependent and, as a consequence, politically and economically unstable. We expect that the OSCE be guided by the primary tasks and build relations with sovereign states based on respect, trust, and transparency. Dear ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to note the following. We very often, and personally I very often, hear appeals by our partners, including our European partners, to the effect that Russia should play an increasingly active role in world affairs. In connection with this, I would allow myself to make a small remark. It is hardly necessary to convince us to do so. Russia is a country with a history that spans more than 1,000 years and has practically always used the privilege to carry out an independent foreign policy. We are not going to change this tradition today. At the same time, we are well aware of how the world has changed and our realistic sense of our own opportunities and potential. And of course, we would like to interact with also independent and responsible partners with whom we work together in constructing a fair and democratic world order that would ensure security and prosperity not only for a select few, but for all. Now, that's the end. Now, I'm telling you, it loses a little bit in the translation, number one. Loses something else in the fact that I'm reading it, and you can't see the reaction of the world leaders who are having it interpreted for them at the time. But all of these points that he makes are accurate. If you go back and you think about everything that he said right there, it's like a prediction of where we are today. You can't play with Russia. You can't do it. BRICS bad, West good, Europe gets to make all the decisions, America gets to make all decisions, China, who cares? India, they're nobody. Russia, well, they're definitely bottom feeders. Get out of there. This is how the world has developed, and this is what people think is it. And so that speech was basically a shot across the bow to say, look, this one world order, this unipolar world, is not acceptable for us. It is not acceptable to the global South. It is not acceptable to India, to China. And he lobbed a couple of missiles across the bow there, saying, and the glares from those, from Lieberman and from what's his name, Cheney, were just fantastic. Watching what those jokers thought about the discussion here, it was just incredible what they said. I am glad I read that to you. I hope you enjoyed that part and wanted to read it. I want to get to somewhere. JR had, if I can find it, he had the live at Damn Radio somewhere where I could get to the emails. There it is, Damn Radio Mail. Because I think I saw a couple that said Samuel on there. And somebody, whether it was me or somebody else, that I sent to myself, were there and that we put for the show. And if you wish to send something to me, I'd be happy to have a look at it. I don't read them all. In fact, I am very picky and choosy about them. And I sent some to myself on Margarita Simonyan. I wish she had done this in English. She studied in America, and her English is pretty good. When she was talking about Zelensky and his tripping and falling. The news today on the Russian side of the planet is pretty interesting. But before we get to that, I wanted to follow up with my thought process on what uh, Trump's speech last night in comparison to Putin's from 2008. Now, imagine this. And I said earlier that there are maps cruising around, floating around, that show Ukraine divided into three, that show Ukraine losing all the way up to the Dnieper River to Russia, that show uh, just basically not wiped out, but the no Ukraine. That Ukraine is now three countries. It's part of Poland, part of Romania, part of Russia. I'm not saying I support that, so I don't need people sending me nasty emails and saying, you're trying to kill off a culture. I'm not. I'm just saying that there are other people talking this way. And it's clear that the U.S. thought processes are not for a conflict in Ukraine anymore. We're for ending the war. Now, there are plenty of people out there that still love their war and they want it to continue. And boy, they just want to kill more, kill more, kill more, and that is truly depressing. And they shouldn't be allowed to do so. There was something about uh, reconsidering Trump reconsidering what he had said, terminating the aid, all aid, instantly, no matter where it was in transit. There's a ton of American weapons in Poland still. There's huge stockpiles of them in Poland. And those were destined for Ukraine, but they are stopped. And now there's talk today that Trump will reconsider starting that back up. Last night, before the speech of Donald Trump, quickly, a 3-minute little blurb and a different. It was at night. He was on the street, and I think he wanted to say something. There was talk all over the East, all over that side of the world, that Trump was going to say a ton of words about Ukraine. Now, I didn't see the first 10 minutes of his speech. I came in about 10 minutes late, but I saw all the rest. But he didn't say anything about Ukraine after that. And if he did say anything about Ukraine, I missed it. I meant to go back and watch the first 10 minutes and see what it said, but I don't believe that he spent a lot of time on it. But what they were saying in the East is that he was going to say that we're basically abandoning Ukraine and good luck to you. You and Europe get together. But Zelensky had himself a little 3-minute YouTube short, or well, he did it on Telegram or something. And he was outside this time. He wasn't sitting in his office like normal. He wore a coat instead of his T-shirt, so it was different. You see him different, and it was all in Ukrainian what he said. So I had to read what was said down below. And basically, he said that we have the ability to protect ourselves. He was saying we don't need the United States. We have we still have our friends in Europe. He's worried about the people of Ukraine getting all depressed and worried about them throwing him out of office for whatever foolishness that he came upon, and his idiocy in the Oval Office didn't work out as he had planned. And now Trump's saying we're pulling support, which still I don't think, hasn't been given back to him. It could have been today. I've been really busy today and I didn't have time to look. But he also said that what he had said in the overall office was regrettable, but he didn't apologize. He said that it was regrettable. And people say that he has no intention of talking apologies. Now, I've done several Russian shows since that time, and the amount of people that comment back on some of the things that I say, which are identical to what I say here, I just say it in Russian. Um, they they think that uh, Trump not funding it is something that needs to happen, but there's no trust of Trump either. There's none of that. Trust me on that one. They don't necessarily trust him, and the fact is they don't trust America. And it's like I've said before, it's because America's always changing their mind. One thing one day, something completely different the next, and so it's have to be careful with who we are hanging out with, and what we are going to say. There's plenty of things to talk about. So here's what the White House said. What time was this? This was on the last night. No, tonight, Russian time, 9 o'clock Russian time, so about 1 o'clock our time. Says the U.S. is reconsidering funding Ukraine by the White House. Washington paused aid to Ukraine while reviewing whether or not to continue, said Carolyn Leavitt. She made the statement in a press conference Wednesday when asked by a journalist if the aid freeze was permanent. National Security Council told me they paused or are reconsidering the funding for Ukraine, said Leavitt. It's a pause for a review, she elaborated when asked a second time. The U.S. suspended military assistance to Ukraine after a meeting then they tell a little bit about Trump accused Zelensky of not being interested in making peace with Russia. Rather, he aimed to get Russia signed up for war and keep fighting. U.S. intelligence shared with Ukraine has similarly been brought to a stop. Now that will hurt. CI Director John Ratcliffe confirmed to Fox Business on Wednesday when asked whether Washington cut off cooperation with Kiev. Trump had asked for a pause to see if Ukraine was ready to work toward peace. President Trump had a real question whether Zelensky is committed to peace, said Ratcliffe. When asked about the military aid freeze, National Security Advisor Waltz likewise told Fox News on Wednesday that Trump would examine lifting the pause if we can nail down these negotiations. The day before, Zelensky took a U-turn on years of denying negotiation with Russia and declared himself ready for immediate ceasefire in a lengthy post on X. Kiev is ready to move to the end of conflict through an immediate release of prisoners, temporary ceasefire, and a ban on long-range strikes on energy and civilian infrastructure, he wrote. Moscow has repeatedly said that it has been ready to return to the negotiating table, pointing out that Zelensky signed a decree banning talks with President Putin after the escalation of the conflict in 2022. However, Russia has underscored that it wants a permanent, stable peace and considers a temporary ceasefire unacceptable, stressing that the time would simply be used to rearm Ukraine, for further hostilities. How do you like that? And that, it's a pretty well-written article, pretty true. That's accurate. On that same report, CIA confirms the suspension of intelligence sharing. Is that separate article? Washington brought all intelligence sharing with Ukraine to a halt. The development came a day after the media outlets reported the suspension of military assistance. When asked by host Maria Bartiromo whether the U.S. had cut off cooperation with Ukraine. Ratcliffe said Trump had asked for a pause. Trump has a real question whether Zelensky's committed to peace, said Ratcliffe. Zelensky now states publicly that he's ready for peace, of course. On Tuesday, the Ukrainian leader said that Kyiv is ready for immediate POW release and a temporary ceasefire on missiles, long-range drones, bombs on energy, and other civilian infrastructure. On the military front and on intelligence front, the pause allowed that to happen, changing his statement, said Ratcliffe. The halt of intelligence sharing was selective. Sky News initially reported on Wednesday, citing a Ukrainian source. However, the move made it difficult for Ukraine to launch attacks against targets deep inside Russia. The British outlet reported later the same day that Washington had halted the flow of intelligence completely. A few hours ago, the exchange of all intelligence information was stopped, a Ukrainian source told Sky News. Washington reportedly also banned its allies from sharing with Ukraine, Financial Times said on Wednesday, citing sources familiar with the matter. Recipients with assets inside Ukraine itself are likely to continue to pass on relevant information, the paper said, but Kyiv would likely miss out on time-sensitive and high-value intelligence it needs to strike moving Russian targets. Trump and Zelensky had heated exchange, blah, blah, blah. Several outlets, including Bloomberg, New York Times, CNN, reported that Trump had paused military aid after the fallout. According to the New York Times, the president's order affected more than $1 billion in arms and ammunition in the pipeline and on order. Moscow commented on the reports by saying that if the U.S. were to suspend military supplies altogether, it would probably be the best contribution to the side of peace. Well, I agree with that, ladles and jelly spoons. I definitely agree with that. I like reading about, as you know, finding the stories of opinion. I like them. But I'm going to go to this one first. This is kind of an opinion piece, I suppose. EU security could crumble without U.S. support, according to Politico. Donald Trump has clashed with the bloc, the EU, over Ukraine. Did you see what Orban was saying? Orban was saying, this is the best thing that could have happened. He wants, not Orban, I'm sorry, Fico. Was it Fico? Yeah, I think it's Fico. That says, well, you know what? We're going to deny all ability to we're going to vote against any continued funding of Ukraine by the EC unless they reinstitute the flow of gas from Russia through Ukraine, sign a new deal. So then for Ukraine, it would be good too, because then they could continue to siphon off however much they need, because that's what they were doing before, and have all this free gas. So they get free gas for the duration of it because they don't pay for it. Geez, they don't have any money anyway. And so there's plenty of stuff going on, but EU security could crumble without the U.S. EU leaders fear that the post-World War II security architecture could crumble any day without U.S. support, said Politico, citing European officials familiar with the mood ahead of a crucial summit in Brussels. The sense of uncertainty and pessimism among Ukraine's backers in Europe has only grown since U.S. President Trump reportedly halted all weapon deliveries to Kyiv Monday. Defense spending is becoming a fixed cost, a European diplomat told Politico. We've switched off the sun, and now we need to pay every day for the heating. And every day you need to pay for ammunition, at least for several years, get this, until Trump is dead. Yeah. So the U.S. will pay, once Trump is dead, the U.S. will go right back to what it was doing before. That's what everybody thinks. Top officials in the EU, Britain, and Ukraine previously expressed frustration after Trump launched direct talks with Russia, publicly berated Ukrainian leader Zelensky, whom he called dictator. According to Politico, some officials from EU member states worry that the bloc's response to Trump could go horribly wrong. I happen to agree. You're playing with fire here. The diplomats, because you're going to drive Trump into the arms of Putin. And guess what they're going to do? They're going to exchange they're going to exchange Russia's backing for Greenland for the US's backing for the eastern half of Ukraine. You know what I mean? If we're going to play risk here, let's play risk. Okay, let's play risk. See how this adds up. The U.S. strategically wants the Arctic Circle. They want to be up there. Trump is pretty smart in that. I've been talking about the Arctic Circle for 6-8 months. He, of course, left it out of his campaign issues, but because Panama, the Greenland thing, and the Arctic Circle never came up until afterward. The peace with Ukraine came up, but how does he get peace with Ukraine? He can force it if he wants to keep putting missiles somewhere. So missiles in Ukraine. That's part one. A trade to get somebody to help him get Greenland, because in part the Russians have been very much against Greenland because they know it gives the U.S. an equal, not equal, but about a pretty good percentage of the Arctic Circle territory, which now goes to Canada and Greenland. And Greenland is the biggest, except for Russia. Russia's is definitely the biggest, but then Greenland bumps up against the Arctic Circle too. All the U.S. has is a small part of Alaska. And so if you could get them to convince, and now allegedly with the warming of the planet, that is becoming a major shipping route, and people are going up through that ocean from China, from Eastern Russia, and all of those places. So you don't have to go around the south of South America or through the Panama Canal. The U.S. militarily wants that Panama Canal, although they already had it anyway. It's just they're paying quite a bit more. So if anybody can come up with any ideas from the risk board to figure out why this is important, it appears to me that this would be a good strategy for our fearless leader. Yes, our fearless leader could just continue to. Well, I'm taking it. I'm taking it. It's mine. It's mine. I'm going to take it. Anyway, I'll continue to read this. The diplomats also reportedly have concerns that a pro-Russia group of leaders led by Prime Minister Viktor Orban is capable of derailing support for Ukraine in Europe. Orban, as well as Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico, have urged Brussels to drop unconditional military aid to Ukraine in favor of finding a diplomatic solution. According to Politico, Hungary has opposed the inclusion of a pledge to ensure further arms deliveries to Ukraine in a final statement from the upcoming summit to EU leaders. The EU will discuss further steps to back Ukraine and boost the bloc's own defenses during a high-profile meeting in Brussels on Thursday. That's tomorrow, folks. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has unveiled a plan to invest 800 billion euros, or $863 billion, in the member states' military capabilities. While Russia has welcomed the resumption of direct negotiation with the U.S., it stressed that no amount of Western aid will stop its troops. Well, I believe that's true. Let's see. What else are we going to get rid of? That was the Daily Mail. We already talked about that, though. UK banned from sharing U.S. intel with Ukraine. U.S. Democrats launch anti-Trump social media blitz. Trump wants a bigger Ukraine resources deal than what he's currently got. And maybe that will force the old Zelensky monster back to the table. What do you think, ladles and jelly spoons? Let's see. Let's get to the opinion part again. Why Russia-U.S. talks are a good sign for everyone. And then that's one opinion piece. There's another one. Democracy does not die in darkness, but it is dying in the EU right now. We might read both of those if and I'm sure we got time. Let's do it. The first one is why Russia and U.S. talks are a good sign for everyone. This is by Adamu B. Garba II. executive chairman of IPI Group Limited in Nigeria. And he also ran for president there. So the shift in relations between Russia and the US may open doors for a more, get this, balanced multipolar system. Tell you what, the multipolar system is coming anyway. So this occurred. This came about yesterday. Before I get to reading the article, it's something that I saw on the news or some of the things that I read. The trade between Russia and China is up, I don't know, 500% what it was before. It's enormous. So trying to get U.S. companies back into Russia, even if it does start, isn't really going to be something that everyone wants. Now, I remember seeing signs over there, and there was one in particular, and I wish I could remember what it was, but some brand name, some women's clothier, some women's purse thing, that we can do without Michael Kors purses. And I don't mean to pick on Michael Kors; it's just the only one I can remember. We can do without Michael Kors purses, but we can't do without our sovereignty. So there were ads like this, billboards like this that you would see. So our sovereignty is more important than your name brand. And so these name brands have all been replaced by Russian and Chinese, whether they call them knockoffs or what. They're identical. They always have been identical. And we call them knockoffs in the United States and claim, well, that's not a real Michael Kors. That's a Chinese fake one. Okay. And so what? It's pretty and it works and it's cheaper. And so in Russia, they've now come up with almost everything has been replaced. They've been doing what Trump is trying to do now. Trump is trying to do what the world forced Russia to do, to look inward, to trade inward, to build itself, to buy American, to buy Russian. Everything they do is there. And they have a strategic partner right next door. China, India, all of those. And it has grown dramatically. And guess what it's not doing any longer, especially since the start of BRICS back in 2007. And it's multiplied dramatically since then. And the rest of the world is doing it. Blockchain, multipolar trade, non-US dollar trade through the SWIFT system is going to kick the crap out of our economy. And Donald J. Trump knows it. That is why he's doing what he's doing right now, to bring everything back home, build America, invest America, bring factories here, tariff the hell out of everybody else. He's creating his own blocks to outside influence because the sanctions have not worked. The sanctions have made Russia more powerful. Their GDP, China's looking at a GDP of 5 to 6% this year. Russia's looking at 5 to 6%. Ours, since Trump came in, is looking pretty good. But before that, we were at a 0.1, some 0.5%, even a negative growth, especially because of all of our debt. Russia doesn't have any debt to speak of. China's got wealth. It's I don't know. And now they're trading without the dollar. So all the money we made by trading in the dollar, we're first forcing people to use the SWIFT system and taking out your 10% of every transaction worldwide. Where's that 10% now? Who the hell's funding the SWIFT bank system now? Europe. And Europe's economy is about 2/3 the size of Russia's. And it's 10% the size of BRICS. It's very, very small. So at any rate, these changes are coming, whether you like it or not. Okay. Here it goes. This one is the why Russia-US talks are good for everybody. Africa has been heavily affected by the conflict between Russia and Ukraine since the start of Russia's military operation in February 22. According to a report compiled by ODI Global, the African Economic Research Consortium, the Economic Research Forum, and Partnership for Economic Policy, an article called The Impact of Russia-Ukraine War on Africa, policy implications for navigating shock and building resilience, Africa has been caught in the crossfire due to lack of food supplies and agricultural commodities. The report features case studies on Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, Morocco, Mozambique, Senegal, South Africa, and Sudan, and finds that while direct trade exposure is low, Africa relies on Russia and Ukraine for food and fertilizer imports. Prices are up. The conflict has driven up the prices of oil, food, and fertilizer globally. Simulations suggest that a 10% shock in oil, food, and fertilizer may reduce Africa's annual GDP by $7 billion. Actual impacts are likely to be higher since oil, food, and fertilizer prices increase by larger shares at 40%, 18%, and 55% in 2022. Global commodity price increases also prompt an increase in interest rates in high-income countries, which in turn trigger capital outflows, exchange and rate depreciation, and higher borrowing costs for many African countries. The magnitude of an individual country's impact varies based on commodity dependence, financial openness, and domestic vulnerability. The conflict may have exacerbated the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on deterioration of Africa's macroeconomic and social performance. The overlapping crises have slowed Africa's developmental progress and risk long-term scarring effect. In 2022, 18 million new poor people were added to the 546 million Africans already living in poverty, and 1 of 5 Africans face high levels of food insecurity. Women and vulnerable groups also tend to be disproportionately impacted. They go into the cost of wheat and fertilizer, which is quite similar. Grain deal collapses, oil and gas, and all of those things have similar to, on oil in particular, I wanted to point this part out. Mariamu Idris, executive director of Crude and Condensate, said, and it's a company, said in November 23 panel presentation at the Argus European Crude Conference that in addition to the substantial price shock impacting commodity and energy prices globally, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has triggered, has triggered a situation where India, a primary destination for Nigerian crude, increased its appetite for discounted Russian barrels of oil. Discounted now, damn it. Blah, 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 blah. Primary destination, to the detriment of some Nigerian volumes. To illustrate the extent of this shift, Nigeria's crude exports to India dwindled from approximately 250,000 barrels a day in the 6 months preceding 2022 invasion of Ukraine to 194,000 in the subsequent 6 months. And so far this year, only around 120,000 barrels a day of Nigerian crude make their way to India. What's next? Now that the prospect of peace is here, it looks portent that the African economy will be revived to a more positive direction. What is even more significant is the prospect of the American acceptance to a new reality of a multipolar world. There you go. Saudi Arabia, not Belgium or France or the UK, was chosen for talks between US and Russia. Under Trump, the US is indicating its disconnect to the old order, where everything starts and ends in the West. This, however, remains somewhat twisted, considering Trump's unfavorable stand against BRICS. The fact is, Africa will be better off with a new multipolar order. Most of the current multilateral institutions were created before most African states gained their independence. The UN, IMF, World Bank, WTO, and the SWIFT payment system, etc., were all created, engineered, and controlled by the West, often deployed to the detriment of Africa. These institutions helped strengthen the unipolar system with the US as the leader of hegemony, supported by the EU. These institutions have long been tagged by the neo-colonial assets used in shortchanging the African continent on its valuable resources, weakening the growth and development of the entire continent through unfair treatment and practice. Now, I find that hard to disagree with, even if you're looking for something to disagree with. That's hard to disagree with. More balance is needed. That's another subparagraph, subheading. Hence, the quest for Africa is to have a new, more balanced international system. Africa has long demanded to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Several promises were made by the US and other powers, but nothing has ever been granted. Africa requested enough trade to fund its infrastructure, healthcare, and education programs that will serve the needs of the people, yet the Western powers deem it more appropriate to respond to African demands for equal participation and representation with aid rather than with mutually beneficial proposals from both parties. By the way, that's why they're turning to BRICS and to China, because China won't dictate any of these aid scenarios. They will fund a new port, a new rail system, a new whatever, and take a part of it, and get some profit back that way. The new peace talks between Russia and the US may open the door for a more equal, balanced, and orderly multipolar system that will be formed when Africa is fully aware, independent, and at the table. This will help Africa as a continent to push forward its interests within the emerging BRICS multipolar system. So I find that to be quite illuminating, and I hope you do as well, because it truly is, and it's a multipolar world. Marco Rubio was talking about it, and if he's talking about it, that means Trump's talking about it, and that means they realize the weakness of Europe. They realize that us funding a dying it's not a dying civilization, but such a small civilization, and why do France and England, 70, 80 million apiece, have more of a say in the world order than China or India, who have billions upon billions of people living there, but have zero say in what goes on in the world? Now, Trump's speech last night notwithstanding, the U.S. isn't going anywhere right now. We're still number one. We will be for a good long time, but the old ways maybe have a hard time. People have a hard time dealing with the fact that the old ways are going away. I got to tell you, I do too. But that doesn't mean that we need to cling to them as if this is the I don't know what, the last finger holding on to the platform while you slip down into a I don't know what, slip into the ocean, like in a movie, somebody's holding on by 5 fingers, then 4, then 3, and then they drop off, and that's that. Or actually, somebody will come and rescue them at the last minute. I don't think that Trump's any rescue for us. Short term, sure, but that doesn't mean we're not going to be hanging on the same ledge if we don't change our ways and think about the rest. I challenge you to consider what, don't call me a Putin apologist if you want. I'll call Putin somewhat of a prophet for what he said. He has done things that his country, love him or hate him, and in his country too, there are people that hate him. There are people that speak poorly of him. They don't. They may not be as vocal about it. There are different rules over there, but that's true in many, many, many countries. That they don't. They take a little bit of a different view in how they, incite other people. More of a Democrat view of, well, you can't do this. It's okay for them, but not for anybody else. Anyway, I don't want to babble on that topic, but but in general, even if they don't like him, they acknowledge that he's done fantastic things and for his country and brought them out of the horror story that was the 90s after the collapse of the Soviet Union and all the Western companies, all the Western rich people going over and raping the former Soviet Union and taking over anything they could get their claws on during the collapse, kicking them while they're down. And so you can say a lot about the man, but a lot of people think he saved his country. So that'll end the show today. I very much appreciate you paying attention and listening to me and joining us along. I do want to look at the, sorry, the wrong one. Clicked there. The Damn Radio schedule. Today is Wednesday. And I'll be done here at about 5:30 in Old Ikester. Going to be here at 6 p.m., it says. I'm going to try to give him a listen to, but I got a little bit of work to catch up on. And so hopefully I get to, because I like listening to him. If not, I'll listen to him later on, because we have a podcast, and you can go to damradio.com/. It's actually damradiopodcast.com, and you can listen to our prior shows. How is mine from today already ready to play? Wonder if they cut me off or what. Well, I hope that didn't happen. If it did, then you can join me on internationalflavor.podbean.com, and the entire show will be played. I don't know what happened to the one, but how can I have a show for 3.5 if 3.5 show is still going on? Ladles and jelly spoons. Anyway, thank you so very much for listening. Tune in tomorrow. Join me, two dogs, and a vicar when we'll be playing Pederasto, the game for all the family. Thank you very much, and you have a good evening.